We all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet.
Good morning, Vietnam! I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? When we're going, we don't need roads. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman. I am the father.
Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. We are recording a Bond special because we are talking about No Time to Die, which is Bond's 25th outing in the cinema. And I am joined by a full house today for this particular podcast. Forgot the word for podcast there, that's great. I am joined by Thomas and John. Thomas, how are you?
I am doing very well. It's good to be back in the podcast. It's good to be speaking to you about film, especially Bond. It just feels like, was this film ever going to come out at one point?
I know. I think, what was it, 4 delays in total? That's got to be a record. Yeah. That might actually be a record for pandemic cinema. And John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm surprised that I could expel so much snot from my body over the last couple of days and still not lose any weight. But yeah, nice. There you go. There's not much you can really do about that. But yes, I'm good. I'm glad to be speaking to other human beings rather than just looking at a computer screen all day and writing some stuff. So yeah, it's been a nice couple of weeks.
We are obviously discussing No Time to Die, which is Daniel Craig's last outing as Bond.
James Bond, licensed to kill, in love with Madeleine Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection. Only your skills die with your body. And life is all about leaving something behind, isn't it?
This film has obviously been delayed multiple times, so it had a massive opening weekend at the box office. Bond is obviously back. He is reunited with Madeleine Swan and Blofeld, and he is on a mission to find out who the mysterious Safin is, what his plans are for nefarious world domination, and also to take some time to actually reassess his personal life and how much his job has essentially taken its toll on who he is, the people he gets involved with, the lies that he tells, and there's obviously a lovely appearance from Ana de Armas as well. Simi, what were your thoughts on the movie?
I've only ever seen all the Daniel Craig Bond films, the ones. So I always kind of find it hard to say I prefer this one to that one and that, but it's so far between and the new one's always fresher. But this is the most fun I've had watching Bond since probably Casino Royale. I just thought it was so entertaining. It wasn't as bogged down in its own self-worth. I think that Spectre was. I didn't think it was as pretentious as Spectre either. I thought Skyfall was also very heavy in its themes and topics that just kind of crushed the enjoyment for the film. Whereas with this, I did think it was a lot lighter for the most part, although the world domination evil villain plan was pretty brutal. There was a lot of humour in it that I thought really worked, a lot of different humour we don't usually get in Bond films. You mentioned Ana de Armas in the scene where like Bond tries to hit her and she's like, no, what are you doing? And I just thought that was really funny because as much as I think she's like 33, she looks a lot younger. And Daniel Craig looks a lot older, regardless how old James Bond's supposed to be. It would have looked weird, although we're used to seeing James Bond hitting young women. It was better played for laughs at that scene, I think. I think it really worked. So wee bits like that for the film, I thought were great. I thought they were really good. So yeah, really emotional as well. I mean, there's no getting away from the emotive subject of it. Very intense. But just overall, we're just a great blast of a film.
Yeah, totally agree. John, your first thoughts?
I was quite surprised by the film, to be perfectly honest. I was really looking forward to it. I always look forward to the Bond films. I liked the fact that with the Daniel Craig films, there was a sort of a through arc throughout the film. So you can trace something from the first film through to the last film. And in preparation for actually seeing it, I did go back and watch Casino Royale, which is my favourite of the Bonds, just because it's like his first introduction to it. And then you can actually see some of the through lines and various story elements which link directly to Casino Royale. Obviously, there's various other bits with some of the other films as well, but that was very sort of prescient to what we actually saw on screen. I liked the fact that Craig was a bit older, and yeah, it did show his age a lot in it, and he didn't try to mask that the same way that Roger Moore tried to mask it in some of his later appearances. And as I say, I was surprised in the fact that the opening scene was so long.
Yeah.
I thought at some point this is going to end, and then it would go into the titles and everything, but it didn't. It just kept rolling on, rolling on. It must have been about 25 minutes long. It was really, really extended. And I was surprised at the fact that there were so few action scenes as compared to dramatic scenes. There was a lot more talking in this film than probably any previous Bond. It didn't seem to be a film that was based around the set pieces. It was more based around the characters, which was maybe a slight departure. They've been moving towards that, but it meant that the action pieces for me fitted in better with the film rather than for the sake of spectacle. But having said that, it did end up in exactly the same way as every other Bond seems to end up, in the evil lair. But we can speak about that later on as well. But yes, initially, very happy, very entertained.
Yeah, for me, it felt like as much as a sort of a love letter to Daniel Craig. A sort of thank you for your service, to be a bit cheesy. You know, it felt like a very Craig focused, like as you say, quite drama focused, as opposed to big stunts. Although we did get the motorcycle going up over the wall, which made me actually squeal in the cinema. But I felt this was a more personal Bond, in the sense that you did get to know, you could tell there was kind of hopes and fears in there. He wasn't just a sort of ruthless secret agent killing machine. It felt like a more humanized version of him. And obviously there's the relationship with Madeline Swan. Did that appeal to you guys? Did that make you feel like you knew the character more, or are you just here for sort of big explosions and set pieces? What do you think about striking that balance?
I think it worked. It wasn't so much a case of when I was going into the film, I was wanting either or. It's more a kind of case for me is when I go and see a Bond film, it's not a case I'm expecting X, Y, and Z. It's, does the vehicle benefit from the story they're telling? And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you go and see a Bond film and it is all spectacle. But yeah, you see some Bond films that are always kind of spectacle, and that's fine. And you see something like this that more kind of dramatic, and it works. And for me, I didn't really know what to expect. I think the Bond films, when it comes to the actor's swan song, have a bit of a patchy history. To be honest, we'll always go back to Die Another Day and the Invisible Car, which I
don't acknowledge the Brosnan era at all.
Oh come on, GoldenEye's one of the best Bond films. But
coming after Dalton, there was nothing that was going to top that for me. So until Craig came along, so
I mean, GoldenEye's so good. Sean Bean dies twice. But I mean, but this, though, for example, it's they had the runtime as well to fill, and they did invest
it's a long
more in Bond.
runtime.
It was
long runtime. Yeah,
they did invest more in Bond and the character and the man, as you were saying, John. And it wasn't a kind of case of me getting expecting either or, but for me, it really, really worked because they pulled it off. They delivered for me, and being that it was Daniel Craig's swan song as Bond, I liked it, as you're saying, John, as well. There's clear art to it, so it made sense to me to go that way, especially with the ending they delivered. You couldn't get that payoff unless you were caring about the character. Caring about Bond's one thing, but caring about Bond in this film and Daniel Craig's Bond as a whole is something different, and I think it really delivered.
Well, you can tell that the emphasis was more on the character of Madeline Swan and the fact that the opening scene, which traditionally in a Bond film is an action set piece involving him chasing down somebody or almost like a self-contained story, but this time the focus was on Madeline Swan to begin with, her backstory, her young life and everything, and I thought that was a very bold move. Let's face it, because you don't get that in a Bond film. You could understand why people would be saying, "Well, this isn't the sort of Bond I'm signed up for." But it was, in terms of sort of dramatic storytelling, it was a real step forward for a film that could quite easily alienate an audience by doing something like that. But I think they got away with it.
I'm going to disagree with you guys slightly, just because I love Bond and I love all the sort of the glamour of the Bond girls and the various relationships over the years. I don't want my Bond to settle down. I don't want that domestic life. I don't care. I want you to be out killing bad guys, and I want you to look, amazing in a tux while you're doing it. I'm happy with all the sort of string of sort of meaningless relationships, but I actually almost don't want Bond to become domesticated. And I know that sounds really silly, but I think it's just because I like the dark. So I like the early days Craig, and I love Dalton as Bond, and I even early Sean Connery. I like that dark, ruthless, brooding, that really cold-blooded type of character. And so actually for me, although there were some lovely touches, including the music, which we can come on to, I actually really don't like Daddy Bond, and I don't mean Daddy in the good way. Like, I just think that to me it's quite incongruous with what I think of when I think of Bond. So I guess I'm exactly what you said, John. I'm perhaps not the target market for that type of message, but it's just because I prefer the sort of darker side, not because I'm worried about Bond getting woke, etc., etc. I just say I prefer the darker stuff.
See, I did think this Bond was very dark, though. I mean, he killed indiscriminately, pretty brutally, and I mean, there's that scene that was in the trailer as well, with the cars flipping over, and he's chasing it with a machine gun through the windscreen. He was double tapping like a motherfucker during this film.
But I also think that a lot of that is because it was inspired by his desire to protect Madeline and, spoilers, her child. And I just think that, again, I don't ever see in my head anyway, I don't see a Bond motivated by love. I'd see a Bond motivated by duty, and the desire to protect is bigger than just the individual.
Does Dalton's Bond not do that? I'm wondering.
So no, he obviously, I think you mean in License to Kill.
He's motivated by revenge, wasn't he?
Yeah, so that's more of a revenge thing than like a sort of paternal instinct or whatever you want to call it. However, like I said, it didn't bother me so much that I didn't enjoy the film. It's just a wee sort of niggle for me. Obviously, the whole opening sequence, just before it sort of launched into Billie Eilish's really, really good Bond theme, I actually think she did a really good job. And there's that beautiful piece of music which is called Matera, which obviously riffs really lovely. The John Barry version of We Have All the Time in the World. I started crying straight away. I knew there was going to be little nods to different Bonds in this film, but I wasn't expecting something so emotive and so early on in the film. Did you guys sort of, I mean, is it just me that was just sitting greeting in the cinema, or did you guys feel that as well?
Can a quick question, mind you, because I really can't answer that as much because I'm not the biggest James Bond fan, but I did notice the music that was All the Time in the World. What film is that? Was that George
Honor Majesty? Yeah, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I was almost kind of hoping, because that's that famous line of "This never happened to the other fella," that they would somehow fling that in here, which they didn't quite work. But the themes of On Her Majesty's Secret Service and the sort of relationship dynamic are obviously very, very similar to this Bond, which is why Lazenby's been tweeting about it quite enthusiastically, because I think he gets a bit of a bum rap for being the romantic Bond, and he's obviously enjoying seeing that resurgence of that side. But yeah, that piece of music I thought was perfectly timed, brilliantly executed, and actually just really brought it all together as being part of this sort of bigger thread as opposed to just this one Bond. Yeah,
it worked really well, didn't it? I'd actually heard it a couple of days before. It was one of the tracks that they released just before it, and you hear the opening sort of chords of it, and you know right away, even before the theme comes in, because there's like sort of wee teasers in it, and then you go, that's what that is. Yeah, it worked perfectly well, and obviously with the line as well, we have all the time in the world, because when she wants to go faster in the car, and he says, no, we've got all the time in the world, and you know at that point that something dark is going to happen. It's not going to be plain sailing at all.
Yeah,
you just know as well when they made that line, there was always somebody in the cinema that laughed really loudly, just to let you know he got that joke.
I hate people like that, but yeah, and thankfully I didn't have anyone like that. Or if there was anyone like that at Cineworld Silverburn, I was too busy crying to hear that. But there was lots of like nice, like lovely touches and little nods to other Bonds. But before we sort of go on to that, I really want to mention Billy Magnuson's character of Logan, because you were talking about the sort of comedy elements of it, Simi, and I love the line when Daniel Craig turned around and was like, what's the Book of Mormon doing here? Because he's so like perfectly pressed, and he's like, and that so worked. And I really liked his character and how, although he was this kind of like maybe comedy, sort of almost bordering kind of slapstick type of role, like it seemed to just work and come together, and they actually kind of got the tone of it right, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the fact that he smiled too much and everything, as well, they commented now, and he smells too much, which I thought, obviously they're going for a dark and broody film, and there's this guy, hey!
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got CIA written in his forehead. Yeah, I'm an agent.
I thought he was really, really good. And of course, what a weekend for him, because he had that and he had The Many Saints of Newark out in the same weekend. So Billy Magnuson must be having a great time. But I just thought his character worked really, really well. What I thought was really interesting as well is also the dynamic between Bond and the new 007. Because I think people are so wrapped up in this idea that 007 is Bond and therefore Bond is 007, as opposed to just being a number or a job title. So I think people were kind of losing their shit that Lashana Lynch was obviously taking over this role. But I loved their chemistry together, their relationship, the way they worked together. I thought it just added a whole new layer to the film, and I thought that it worked really, really well. What do you think about this? 007 is a very iconic number. How did you feel about seeing it being given to someone else, as it were?
I liked it because it added to the story. Again, that's the thing. It's not kind of case of me sitting in from the toys at the pram because they've did something that's not traditionally associated with Bond. I'm like, if it works in the story for me, I don't care what to do. And with this, I thought it really worked because it added that wee extra dig in the ribs for Daniel Craig's Bond, to the point like M's like, look, you left us type thing. And we've took your number off. It almost seems like petty for them to do it, although it's just like a football player. They don't always retire their shirt, it gets passed on. But she makes a joke to it at one point, would you think we're going to retire the number? But you also think to yourself that they could have done because he's service, but they deliberately went, no, we're going to give it to somebody else because we're annoyed at you. I can imagine him being that petty.
Oh, totally. That was like a really pissy workplace move. And you're like, oh, it's good to know that like our national security service is every bit as petty as like every other office up and down the country. But I thought it worked. As I say, I thought it added an extra wee layer to the film and another layer to him as well, because you could see that it did get his back up because he obviously did feel that was his number. And again, that sort of added that little bit of kind of tension between him and M as well, because M wants to show, who's boss. So
and I love the bit when he's talking to him and he calls him Mallory.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, just like, it's his wee digs to each other,
Yeah.
Yeah, because that calls back to one of his initial conversations with the Judi Dench version of M, when he says, I didn't realise M was... I thought it was just an initial. It's actually it actually means, she goes, if you say that, I'll have you shot or something like that. So
yeah.
I thought that was quite good. I felt that the introduction of a black woman as 007 initially was a bit of a thumb up to some of the Bond detractors, because you always, we've had this for a couple of years now with possibility of Idris Elba taking on the role, and people say, no, you can't have a Bond that's not white or male. And what they've done there slyly is just slip that in there. So you've got a black woman as a 007, and it works perfectly well because it was a very good performance. Lashana Lynch was fantastic in it. Very dry, very witty, and she gave as good as she got in the sort of verbal competitions between her and Daniel Craig. I thought it worked very, very well.
For the trailers and that, when the trailer came out actually, and people were kind of like moaning about it, and they're saying, I can't believe they made James Bond a black woman. And I was like, have they? And I'm like on Twitter going, how have I missed this?
I can still see Daniel Craig, I know.
I was like, who have they recast? And I watched the trailer and I'm going, oh, so they haven't. They've just, so it's the same film. So actually, this is still a Daniel Craig film. He's James Bond. What? Honestly, who cares?
I know. There's also a theory being floated on the internet that James Bond isn't a real person but a code name, and that's how it sort of allows for all these different actors to.
Well, I have always been 100% on board with that fan theory, and it also makes sense for the fact you've got Judi Dench's Bond transcending Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. Then Skyfall came out, and it was almost like the writers went, "Fuck you and your fan theory." And I never liked that, because I was always like, there was no need for them to do that. I always felt that as a deliberate fuck you. I always felt that way to me.
I think that's just been true to the books, though, because in the books, James Bond is a person. Andrew Bond is his Scottish father, and that's where the roots come from. And I think that, but there's nothing wrong with sort of playing with that theory. How else do you get like Doctor Who and stuff like that? It's like it's okay with playing with that theory and sort of enjoying the fact that as a character, he's fairly malleable. It's
just clearly not one timeline, and it's almost every new Bond's like a reboot. And that was made very, very evident with Daniel Craig, when it was almost him starting off as 007. But then
he had to get his first kills.
Yeah. You had the M crossover part, and you're like, well, so what's this fan theory? And I said, no. Your fan theory is rubbish. We'll go back to the book. Here's just say, fair enough, come back to the book. But have they now written themselves into a corner with the ending of this one? Or did they go for a blanket reboot and reboot M, Moneypenny, everybody?
Do you know, it's possible they could do either. The one issue I had, like I said, I wasn't a massive fan of the sort of personal relationship thing, but the one issue I had with this film in particular, you talked about timelines there. The timeline on this film during this film doesn't make sense. So when we're first introduced to Safin, played by Rami Malek, he is, butchering Madeline Swan's family and then attempts to save her from drowning, from underneath the ice. And he appears to be a young guy. And then Bond meets him, presumably maybe 20, maybe even 30 years later. And miraculously, despite the fact that he spent the past 30 years trying to basically kill people through their DNA in a virus, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, he hasn't aged. So I found that quite, I was like, oh, okay, you've not aged in the entire time, in 30 years. That was the one thing that kind of took me out of this film. And it's a shame because I thought he was a good baddie. The concept of what they were doing was clever. He was manipulating people's DNA to basically kill them on the spot. He was obviously really clever, but actually you got hints of his background and what his father had taught him back at the garden in the evil lair, and I actually liked him better than Blofeld. Did I say it? I thought he was a sort of better baddie.
I did. I've said before, probably not in our podcast, maybe just in general conversation on the pub and that. I was so disappointed with Blofeld and Christoph Waltz inspector. Christoph Waltz was going to play a Bond villain. I'm like, this is going to be good, and it wasn't. And I didn't think he was very good either in the role. It was like it was a different film, and I was like, how have they managed to make an ass of this? It's a guy that's played some of the most iconic villains in cinema, and then he gets to play a James Bond villain, and it's like he's forgot what film he's in. It's like he's in.
It was just a wet wipe. There was no threat. I just never ever felt when you look at other characters that he's played, and you do feel intimidated. And I just thought, Blofeld, really iconic villain, really amazing actor. It just didn't work for me.
Do you think that was maybe the issue? Not to divulge too much for this film, but I suppose he's in this as well. The fact that they made him Blofeld and they went and revamped that and brought him back, and you're like, would have been better just keep him original. I know they brought back Spectre and all that, but I think it was the fact as well because you bring him into it and he's not Blofeld at the start. It's the whole Star Trek Into Darkness thing, isn't it? Is he can? Is he not can? Oh, he's obviously can. Why keep it a secret when it's clear what you're doing?
Yeah. I almost thought, actually, judging by the way they had Safin dressed with that kind of collar, the sort of tunic thing that he had on in the gardens, I actually thought they were going to reboot Dr. No. And I thought this is where this is headed. Obviously, they've not, as people will see once they go and see the film. But I thought he was a far more credible villain, very calm, very softly spoken. As I say, you got to know a little about, he's cultivating all these herbs and he's very interested in science, but he's obviously just, a really bad guy. But I thought he was a much more credible villain, which is such a shame because I do love Christoph Waltz, but it just, Rami Malek was much better, despite the odd timeline thing that went on.
My issue as well with the villain in this was it didn't seem to benefit much. And I don't mean in terms of the screen time and things like that. I mean, it just we spoke earlier about the focus being on the character-driven Bond film. But Bond is a villain, and he had one here. He's a good villain on paper, but on screen, I'm like, his plan doesn't really seem to be that. I don't know. It just doesn't seem much impact for me. It
was very much downplayed, the whole mastering the world kind of plot and everything. Going back to what you said about the timeline thing, the notable difference between the young Safin and the older Safin was the fact that older Safin's skin was a lot better. The young Safin, he looked a bit like Thanos. Whereas the older one, and I thought they kind of got away with that, the time difference thing, because obviously he had some work done. He obviously had his skin fixed a bit. And what it's like. It's very difficult to tell somebody's age if they've actually had decent work done until they're about 65, and everything else hangs off in lumps apart from your chin and your cheeks.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought.
Although I suppose in fairness, the first time you see him, he's wearing the mask. But I just thought that was the only thing that kind of took me out of it. Although I will give you a laugh. When I went to see it, obviously they start off in the lab, and Hugh Dennis rocks up. A few people in the audience were like, "Oh, that's Hugh Dennis!" Really loud. And that was not what I expected I was going to experience at Bond 25. That's for sure.
And that scene itself was pretty brutal. That's pretty.
Yeah, that was
pretty dark.
And again, but it starts off with a joke, obviously, because it's they put, was it anthrax or something? Yeah. They put something on his lunchbox.
Yeah.
They put him off his lunch. You don't expect that. You don't expect secondary characters in a Bond film to actually, well, not even secondary, they're more like tertiary characters in a Bond film to actually have comedic lines in any way. It was
yeah.
And then, of course, it got horrifically dark. It was just, it was very
it was so
clinical. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of sort of dark and light in this as well, because even when they introduced Anna de Armas' character, she's like almost kind of playing the airhead, like, oh, I've never done this before, and and then all of a sudden she's like karate chopping somebody in the face and machine gunning like a whole line of men. So it's like there was that constant sort of back and forth between, and even obviously the dynamic between Logan and Felix as well. Logan's this kind of grinning idiot, and Felix is there to sort of tell bad news or whatever. So I think that they really played with sort of light and shade the whole way through it.
Yeah, Felix was great in this as well. I thought Jeffrey Wright was great as Felix.
Yeah.
I felt that the inclusion of his character and the inclusion of Blofeld were really to tie up ends more than anything else, because you could have kind of done away with that whole Cuba sequence from the film and it wouldn't have made any difference to the film, I don't think. They could have found out the information by being back in London,
Yeah.
But for the spectacle part of it, yes, it was good. And for the fact that it ties up an end, it gives Felix a proper ending. And it obviously gives him motivation. It gives him another reason for revenge as well for moving forward, which I thought was out. And Jeffrey Wright, I could watch him all day. He's just fantastic.
Yes, I suppose that's the thing as well regarding that idea of the Bond being one big, long, continuous line. It's weak had as characters like him that pop back up every so often. And it's like, if you just treat Bond as a reboot each time, regardless of which characters cross over, you can do what you want, really.
Yeah, and I feel like it's strange that they almost have the need for this continuity, because actually, if you ask someone, who's your favourite Bond, they have a very specific era that they're drawn to for either nostalgia reasons or whatever. So I actually almost feel like you don't need that crossover, because someone who likes the Roger Moore era will probably just go and watch the movies anyway, and they'll pick up little points and little nods to that era or whatever. I almost feel like you don't need that level of continuity, because everyone has their own sort of favourites anyway.
I would like in America, you mentioned Doctor Who, but Doctor Who does have that one continuous storyline, even though it's different eras. But like Batman, you got your Adam West Batman, your Michael Keaton Batman, your Christian Bale. It's like everybody's got their own favourite of the era, and nobody ever thinks that Adam West Batman grows up to be Ben Affleck. It's like...
Yeah, and do you know why? Because Adam West was the better Batman.
Ouch.
And thank you. Good night. That was lovely. So yeah, obviously, as we said, there's a lot of continuity. There's a lot of crossover. There's lots of lovely little touches to other Bonds. Is there anything in particular that stood out for you that you thought, oh, that's a nice little nod to such and such? Or were you sort of going in with kind of fresh eyes?
I'm just getting more kind of fresh eyes. Like I say, I'm not the biggest Bond fan, so like some of the obvious stuff, like All 10 in the World, kind of stuck out to me now. There's a lot of Easter eggs that I probably missed, but then you've got me thinking of a Bond verse. I just like the idea of them all crossing over. Like, obviously, you could do it with technology, but Sean Connery's Bond and like Daniel Craig's Bond teaming up, having like banter on screen. That'd be excellent.
I like the use of the Aston Martins. Obviously, there was a classic one, which he won in Casino Royale. But the second one that he was driving was the Timothy Dalton one, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Which was a fantastic wee nod, which I didn't get at first. I had to go and look up later because I was like, I know that car, I've seen it before. And then obviously when I looked, Mr. Dalton's version of it. Yeah, I think there was lots of wee bits in there, obviously, like the fact that there was a conversation between the new 007 and Moneypenny, and they were saying how, I can understand why you shot him and all this sort of stuff, which was a nice wee sort of callback to that. And she says, oh, well, everybody tries at least once. So, that was a nice wee note as well. It was good, yeah.
I like as well the new 00 just cold-bloodedly killed the guy at the end, the scientist. Just booted him into the kind of virus river thing. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I'm into that. I like that. I like that. We kind of like, you know what? They are the cold-blooded agents, and that's been evident throughout the entire franchise, let alone just like Daniel Craig's era. I watched some Spectre the other week. I was down in London, and just watched the beginning. But it's a bit when you got the assassins coming up towards Monica Bellucci, and they just get shot. You see him drop, and like Daniel Craig walks up the silence. I'm just like, I just killed two guys, and I'm just casually going to ash you out,
I will say that I think that similar to Monica Bellucci, I thought Anna de Armas was kind of underused in this as well. She basically
Yes.
a couple of scenes, and I thought it was a shame because I thought their chemistry was really good. It was really natural, not in a sort of relationship type of way, but just that kind of natural sort of working together thing. And I thought a wee bit like Bellucci's character, she had her 5 minutes and that was it. So that was a wee bit of a shame. But the thing is, they introduced, they obviously introduced quite a few new characters. There's obviously your new villain and stuff like that. So I get they don't have time for everything. But I just thought it was a wee shame that she wasn't in it as much as what I'd hoped.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, she's awesome anyway. I think she's brilliant. She's great in this. But I love that whole scene at the party. That to me was just like really classic cheesy Bond. When he realises all the villains know he's there. And Blofeld's like, hello, James. And then the spotlight goes on him. And you're like, how's he going to get out of this thing? Like, that was just... It was so over the top in a very camp way.
Yeah.
For the Daniel Craig films, could be like people saying, "Oh, it's a gritty Bond, and it's more kind of like a Bourne style realism and things like that." But it doesn't lose its touches with wee things like that. It's such a really, when you think about it, absurd scene. All these super villains, and they're all just like, Bond, we've got you." And I love that. I love that.
A supervillain convention.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Where was the risk assessment before they decided to all meet together in a big hotel?
I know, I loved it. Who's out doing bad stuff if we're all in here? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And Bond just walking about, casually, and they're like, "Is that not James Bond?" Nah, can't be James Bond. Can't be James Bond.
Yeah.
James Bond would have been stupid enough to walk for a Spectre convention just willy-nilly. Not the last time. Not again.
No, but I really like, and again, it's that whole kind of thing of like shades of like dark and light. Like, it is ridiculous that he's going into that, and like they're having a drink and all that in the bar beforehand. Then all of a sudden, like, carnage sort of breaks out. I do think it's interesting that the script for this obviously went through like a million redrafts, and obviously Phoebe Waller-Bridge was brought in to rewrite. And I do think there's evidence that she's been there and been in amongst the writing, because you can tell by that sort of light-hearted comedy.
Yeah.
But I do think that actually, if Bond is going to continue, then it does need that type, because I think that, as much as I love the sort of dark and violent stuff, it does need those lighter touches to break it up, because I think it obviously kind of runs the risk of becoming too serious. And when you become too serious, it almost becomes like, you're trying to be like kind of like high art or like pretentious or something. And I just feel like actually that's not Bond as well, because he does have a sense of humour. So I like the fact that there was this kind of sort of running gag sort of through it, not like Roger Moore-esque, like keeping the British end up type of stuff, but just nice sort of quips and stuff like that. Because you would expect someone who's that well travelled and that debonair to be funny, and I like the fact that they sort of brought that in. Obviously, this is a movie that had gone through a lot of problems, not just the fact that it got delayed several times over, but there was like rewrites upon rewrites. And I think was it Ralph Fiennes that actually said, there's lines of dialogue in the trailer that, never made it into the movie, all that sort of thing. Do you think it felt sort of rushed or pieced? I know I'm saying rushed in the sense that obviously it was delayed, but did it feel too pieced together, or did it work? I mean, we're obviously seeing the comedy and stuff worked, but what were your thoughts on the sort of overall package?
I think, especially with the rise in clickbait articles and people try to get traffic to their website, people put too much focus on the idea of a troubled production, and air quotes for people listening, because basically it's a case like, let's put through rewrite after rewrite, and Danny Boyle was attached to the director and left the project, and that happens in films all the time. It's happened in films for years. See if Back to the Future was made now, there'd be all this clickbait article, oh my god, Eric Stoltz has left the project, oh my god, this film's going to be doomed to failure.
Yeah,
it's not. Just these things happen. Films don't just go for, here's my draft, that's excellent, let's make a movie. And they just put too much focus on it now. It must be terrible, that's why they're rewriting it. No, they're always tweaking stuff. It doesn't always work, but it happens more often than not. It's like not every film's made by Quentin Tarantino, where he's got the whole overseer. We've discussed him in previous podcasts as well. Sometimes he needs somebody to rein him in and cut things out. So I didn't think it was obvious in watching the film that it was under all these rewrites and directors leaving and stuff, personally anyway.
No, like Thomas says, that's the nature of filmmaking. You only need to listen to something like Film Stories, the Simon Brew podcast. And every week he talks about films how they went through their production, and it's never an easy process. It's a marathon rather than a sprint getting a film made. So like you say, it is always going to be numerous rewrites. It takes years before a film actually gets to the filming stage normally, because of the fact that they go through so many drafts and so many writers. So I don't think it was disjointed in any way. It was interesting, though, that some of the stories about why Danny Boyle came away from the film had to do with how he wanted the character of James Bond to end up at the end of the film.
Oh, do you know what? That was going to be my next thing. Like, what would a Danny Boyle James Bond look like? So you obviously have done some reading. Yeah. Do you want to share?
Well, ultimately he would be dead.
Oh, okay.
the Danny Boyle vision for James Bond at the end of No Time to Die was he was going to die. He was going to be no more. Yeah, that was one of the stories that was getting floated about around there for it was quite a while, and that was one of the reasons that it's been cited. Obviously not officially, because they just said creative differences, but there was a lot of talk about it being, since it was going to be the last Daniel Craig film, then we would kill him off. And apparently, what was reported, well, I say reported, it's obviously tittle-tattle more than anything else, the producers and everybody else involved with the money-making scam that is the Bond Empire were saying, no, we can't do that. We can't kill off James Bond. It's just not the done thing. And here we are.
I was going to say, so if we get into spoiler territory, like, you know, stop the podcast.
We've been in spoiler territory almost from the start, really.
Well, even more so. So if you really, really don't want to know how No Time to Die ends, then switch off the podcast now. But obviously, at the end of this movie, big giant explosion. Bond is presumably consumed by it, but then you sit.
I don't think so much presumably. You see him pretty much.
Well, you know what I mean. Well,
you couldn't see it through the tears streaming from your face.
Well, what I was saying is, you sit through the credit sequence, and obviously the famous James Bond will be back comes up at the end. So how do you know?
That's the thing. Is
multiverse.
Yeah,
that's it.
if they're saying the continuity, they have written themselves into a corner. But if they bring it back, you've still got Ralph Fiennes and Naomi Harris, and they still allude to it, and they say they have like Lashana Lynch as Bond. Yeah. That's a kind of having your cake and eating type thing. In my opinion.
So she's not Bond.
She's not. No, I know. But so we see if they continue in that vein, for example.
Sure.
But they're just going to just reboot it and just pretend these previous films didn't happen.
Well, I was wondering if they might even go down the route of, do you know, is it Anthony Horowitz that wrote all the young Bonds? I wondered if they'd even go right back to something like that. I mean, would that make as much money? Would that have as big an appeal? Probably not. Sure. But I just wondered because
it would feel like a spin-off.
No, and I don't dispute that, but I just wondered, like, where can they go? Because it does feel like they've written themselves into a corner. But just to be clear to any viewers who might get up, or listeners rather, who might get upset, Lashana Lynch's character is 007. That's the agent number she's been assigned. She's not actually Bond. So they may continue with the Bond franchise with a different 007, but it does kind of feel like they've murdered Bond.
However,
it doesn't say 007 will return, it says James Bond.
That's true.
But that's the thing, they did just reboot it. That's the thing, they can get away with that. If they're just going to say, all these people are individual Bonds and only timelines, their own universe, so to speak. You just reboot it and you just pretend Daniel Craig era never happened. And it works in that sense. It's difficult to buy into, but it's like, if I went to see, like, for example, well, if you went to see, like, Christian Bale's Batman, he didn't die at the end yet, but he's no longer Batman. They'll think he's dead at the end of the Dark Knight. Spoiler alert, if you've not seen it. But as far as I'm concerned, Batman has died. And then they bring him back and Batman, they bring a new Batman out in our past. We're going to have 3 different Batmans on screen next year. I know it's a multiverse comic thing, it's different. But you just reboot it. Call him James Bond. And people will turn around and say, but they killed Bond off. But then if you're saying you killed Bond off, you're accepting all these Bonds are the same person, which doesn't work. We've explained doesn't work. So
yeah. I mean, even just tonally, they're all different and stuff like that. I genuinely think that they need to give it like 5 years or something before they even think about entertaining this. Though it's still quite hot just now. It's still new at the cinema. There's all this debate over who's going to be the next Bond. There's a million names floating about. I genuinely think they need to give it like a good few years, sort of cooling off period, as it were, and really think about what they're going to do with the character rather than rush into something.
Yeah. I disagree with you. I think they're going to try and push forward as quickly as possible because...
Do you think?
Yeah, I think they're going to try and do something within the next 2 years. Their
like
timescale...
Like announce and start filming, or as in announce the new Bond?
They're going to... Well, from what I've read, they're going to announce the new Bond at the start of the year. after
really?
this is all like January, February time. They're talking about like looking, and they must have a list of who they want. So I think it'll be fairly quick.
Place your bets. Who do you think?
I don't think it'll be anybody that's in the sort of the top 10 list. I think it will be a young actor rather than like Idris Elba or anybody like that. I think it's going to be a young character.
I think he's too old. I think you need someone in your 30s if you want to get maybe 10, 15 years out of them. Somebody had touted Richard Madden. Now, I haven't seen enough of his acting but the idea of returning to a Scottish Bond kind of appeals to me if we're going to reboot and restart. But I haven't seen him in enough stuff to know if he's any good.
I've not seen him in a lot of stuff. I've seen him as being quite hit and miss. Bizarrely enough, see when he does his Scottish accent, that's when he's least believable.
Oh no.
It's weird. It's really bizarre. Would he be a good Bond? I don't know. But I did hear the strong rumour that the next Bond villain was Tom Hardy.
That I would be all over and then some. I could get behind
he's
that.
been rumoured he's been rumoured as Bond for a while as well, but he would be an awesome Bond villain.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I remember when Craig was announced, everyone was like, "Oh my god, a blonde Bond! This is ridiculous." But I've totally fallen in love with his sort of interpretation of the character. But yeah, it's funny because people got hung up on, Tom Hardy was too short, Idris Elba's not white. There's a whole list of reasons why people could not be your Bond, in air quotes again. And I just remember the crap that Daniel Craig got when he first got announced. And actually, I think he's been one of the better ones.
The blonde Bond, and it was like he had that entrance to the premiere and the speedboat, and he was wearing the life jacket, and people were complaining about that, saying Bond wearing a life jacket. It's like he's a fucking actor.
Yeah, I know.
I totally forgot about that until you said that. So imagine actually getting shit for wearing a life jacket.
Did they actually think the Queen skydived at the Olympics?
Oh, they must have. She flew out that helicopter, so she did. That was, oh my god.
My guess for the new Bond is Johnny Flynn. I think he would be pretty good in it for a couple of reasons. One, he's a young actor. He's very good. I don't know if you've seen him in many things. He was in Emma. He played David Bowie in the Stardust film that just came out and got totally panned. And he's playing Ian Fleming.
Is this the Cineworld guy?
Operation, yeah, the Cineworld guy, yeah.
Really?
He's playing Ian Fleming in Operation Mincemeat next year, which is about the faking where the landings were going to be in Sicily rather than Sardinia, I think it was. The book's very good. But I think he would be an excellent sort of younger version of Bond.
He doesn't do it for me because I always think Bond has to be attractive, and he doesn't do anything for me in that sense. But if they do cast him as Bond, please, 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 if you're listening, whoever's writing this, can we get the line "time for a tasty debrief" then in the movie? Do you guys have anything else that you want to add about No Time to Die, about the villains, about the music, about the potential for a black woman to ruin everyone's dreams?
What about M? The fact that in this film he was almost as broken a character as Bond was, because he basically introduced the virus into the world under the guise of it'll help us beat the baddies because we can't get in the same room as them. He seemed, obviously he's been drinking a lot more, which was ironically highlighted by Bond.
I think if James Bond is telling you've got a drink problem, you've got a fucking drink problem. Like the fact that he comments on his decanter being out. But it's funny because people were sort of commenting on the fact that M got to drop the F-bomb, and so far the only other M that's ever got to do that is Dame Judi Dench, and she deserves to drop all the F-bombs that she wants. But I thought it felt a little bit forced coming, because I always think of Ray Fiennes very classical, very upright, so it did feel a little bit forced. However, yes, I love the sort of disintegration of his character because he knew he'd fucked up.
Yeah. It was that scene where he obviously felt the weight of the letter on him because he was sitting looking at the portrait of Judi Dench, and in a nice wee sort of callback to other Bond films, you got portraits of two of the other M's. There was a Bernard Lee one and the sort of the, I can't remember the name of them, which I thought was really rather nice.
I suppose that's the thing I really should try and do more with Bond. I suppose I do more now, especially after Skyfall, is rather than trying to find logic in certain things, just accept wee nods. Like if you see a portrait the previous who hasn't featured in this version of the films, just accept it for the wee Easter egg that it is, as opposed to they're trying to claim this is one big universe type idea. Just accept the nod. But regarding the other character, I thought Ben Wishaw's Q again was great.
Yeah,
I think
he
he's
is
really
brilliant.
good, and
He is brilliant.
he's saying it's probably his last film anyway. He's only been contracted up until now.
I think
He
he's
had,
really
he had a
good,
nice wee
yeah.
bit in it as well with when he was looking at the eye, and
Yeah.
it came up and says, "Bionic eye accessed." that was pretty funny. It was good.
See, yeah, like to me, that's gonna be callbacks to like your cheesier Bond moments. The idea
Yeah.
that the villain's lair may as well say "entrance to evil lair" on it type idea. It's that kind of it's the stuff that Austin Powers took the piss out of, and
Yeah.
they're not, and they're going fine. We'll revel in be things like that because it's supposed to be fun. At the end of the day, Bond's supposed to be fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a big blockbuster. I think it works because it does have the serious stuff. Like I said, I don't like the Roger Moore era because that felt like Carry On Bond to me. It was far too comedic
I agree.
for what was on offer. Whereas this has the balance because I like dark, bloodthirsty Bond as well.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, like I thought Sean Connery did both of those quite well. Because let's be honest, especially like the Doctor No stuff. It's Doctor No. It's cheesy. The evil villain in the lair, the metal hand, Blofeld with the cat, and things like that. It is the stuff that maybe at the time wasn't. It was seen as serious at the time. It's since become pop culture and parody to the point that you look back at it differently. But on that kind of sense, I thought is it Dali Ben Salah is Primo, the villain?
Oh yeah,
with the eye. I thought he was great.
Haircut was terrible, but he was great.
I thought he was great. He just seemed to me like a very classic Bond henchman as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he couldn't just attempt to murder Bond. He had to sort of do a wee bit of exposition while he was at it. Spectre did this to you, by the way, before he kills him. You're thinking, okay.
I seen this is actually a criticism in the film as well, saying it felt like an anthology of James Bond's greatest hits. And I'm like, yeah,
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
It's a swan song. You know what I mean? It's like, give me that. Don't give me fucking Madonna.
Yeah, let's never go back there. Those were dark days.
In my opinion, it single-handedly ruined that film.
I like the idea that he'd finally produced a child as well after shagging his way across most of the Western world.
I mean, for all we know, Bond could have been using protection this whole time, so let's not cast any judgment.
Oh, there's hundreds of mini Bonds popping
I
about
know.
this.
Yeah. Where's he going to find
a Bond army?
Space?
Big a Bond army of children, so almost a sort of anti-fathers for justice.
Yeah.
And they're like, they become Bond villains and they start like attacking bad dads.
I love it. I just think, for me, that was the thing, though. I was like, when he was like, she has my, and then she's like, your eyes. And then it's like, ooh, obviously this kid is fucking his. And I really hated the way that they sort of tried to tease the fact that, is it his kid? Is it not his kid? It's obviously his fucking kid. That kind
Did you notice at the beginning of the film, when Bond puts on the train and the door's shut, she grabs her stomach? I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but she does grab her stomach.
It was,
like,
aye. Yeah. Because initially when the trailer came out and it's the initial action scene and he's saying, we all have secrets, we just haven't got to yours yet. It flashed through my mind. I don't know if this says more about me than anybody else, but I thought she's his daughter. And that would open up a whole new world of possibilities for James Bond.
Well, when Blofeld's calling her the daughter of Spectre and things like that, I'm going, is he Blofeld? And then I was sitting going, hold on a minute, are they no brothers? Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. I forget the adopted part of it. I'm like, I forgot about that part. I'm going, yeah. So I wasn't far from your logic, John. I was like,
but just far enough to be on the right side of normal.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, that definitely never crossed my mind, I have to say. But I just, I didn't like the way they were trying to sort of tease out the fact that this could be his kid. Obviously, as you said, John, he's had sex with pretty much like 99% of the female population. Like, he's obviously produced a kid at some point. So, yeah, it was a bit of an odd tease to have when it was such an obvious plot point.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if you think about it, if he's been doing that since 1962, there's probably some children that's older than he is. This time.
I love it. I'm telling you, Children of Bond, that's the next step in this franchise.
Right, a wee correction, by the way. It was Charlie Higson that wrote the Young Bond novels. Not Anthony.
Was it?
Anthony Horowitz wrote a Bond novel. I think
that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Do you remember the cartoon James Bond Jr.?
No.
No, it was his nephew. It was his son. They didn't fuck with the controversy that much back then. But basically, yeah, it was. It was like, if you watch it, I'll send you the link in YouTube, the YouTube link for the intro. It was cheesy, cheesy theme tune and stuff. But yeah, it was his nephew.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Young Bond books are pretty good. I've read I think it's 5 of them. I've read maybe 3 or 4 of them. Pretty good stories. And apparently, they were as soon as the first one got released, there was obviously talk of making films and stuff like that. But Barbara Broccoli had said, no, we're going to hold off on that. We're going to leave that for a number of years. We don't want to just dive into that. But given the fact that they've signed this deal with Amazon, there's every possibility that something like that could come out of it, which may fill the gap, may actually fill a gap rather than rushing into another production of another film.
So with the Amazon deal, then you might even see things like villain origin stories, or sort of taking characters from the Bond universe, whether it's M or whether it's Miss Moneypenny, and maybe sort of expanding on there. I mean, I don't know how much of an audience or how much of an appeal these things have, but I do think that with the Amazon deal, there's an intention there to produce content. I'm just not sure. It's never going to be the movies. They're always going to go to cinema, but there's maybe an opportunity for sort of extended universe type thing.
Yeah, if they throw as much money into that as they do the likes of the Jack Ryan series, then yeah, you've got high quality drama, and it could be the MI6 universe, or like you say, it could bring back certain characters, expanding certain characters. Like you said, like some characters didn't get very much screen time here at all. Like the scene, obviously scenes in Cuba, that could all be expanded, and all that, various characters involved. So yeah, there's a mountain of possibilities, let's face it.
Was there no chat of a Miss Moneypenny spin-off at one point?
I don't know.
With Naomi Harris? I'm just double checking.
I don't know.
This here.
Maybe there might be on Amazon now.
Because there was supposed to be a Jinx film, if you remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Down all day, but that got canned because of the critical reception to Bond film. It's interesting to see that the Bond film is now the 4th biggest film of the year, and it's also the 4th biggest Bond film ever. And Daniel Craig has the top 5 grossing Bond films of all time now.
That doesn't surprise me.
And obviously, it's still showing in about 30 screens in Cineworld, so the chances are it's going to be the biggest Bond film ever as well. So
I'm always intrigued to see who's going to be, obviously, when they announce a new Bond, and obviously who's doing the theme tune. But as I say, I thought Billie Eilish did a really good job. I really liked it. It was quite haunting. I thought the title sequence, worked really well. I still say that out of the Craig era, I think You Know My Name might be the best theme song, closely followed by Adele, obviously. But I still think that Chris Cornell's is probably the best out of the. I always think that he's only done 4 films because I never count Quantum of Solace.
Everybody forgets about Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, because it was shit.
No, I like Quantum of Solace.
I felt Matthew Almonic was wasted. He's a brilliant actor, and he was a shit villain again. So there's the same thing. It's like with Christoph Waltz. He's a really good actor, but a shit villain.
I need to go back and watch all the Daniel Craig films, to be fair, because I remember giving Spectre a very, very favourable review, and without watching it a second time, grew to hate it. That's interesting.
It's not the best, and again, a wee bit of a waste of Monica Bellucci.
Yeah, who was famously older than Daniel Craig.
Yeah, because they made such a big deal. I mean, in fairness, do I want to see like 50-something-year-old Bond hitting on 20-something-year-old lasses? Probably not. It's probably a wee bit icky, but I mean, she looks better at 52 than I look at 32, so she's just a goddess as far as I'm concerned.
She is incredible.
No, Mary, no, that's not right.
I know,
I would say at least. Thomas, for goodness sake.
I mean, Mary, I love you, but I love you, but come on.
I love John. It's all right. I know my place. It's fine. No, I mean, fuck's sake, I've got eyes. She's stunning, right? Well, do you guys have anything else that you'd like to add about the Bondiverse or anything else?
No, I think I've just about covered everything. Spoiled enough, I think, for one sitting. It seems very strange actually having a conversation about films and actually spoiling them as well. It's unusual for us.
See, it's funny. There's one point during the film I thought to myself, I wonder if I'm going to kill Bond off here. Not thinking actually would, because he's going to. You think he's dead, but he comes back at the end of the car or something. It's kind of like the end of Dark Knight, basically. Dark Knight Rises. But you see the explosion that you see him kind of engulfed in this flame. I'm like, yeah, if they bring him back for this, it's really kind of like twist at the end, they're at it.
Yeah.
You know, there's I was even thinking maybe like after the credits type thing, you know, you see wee hand kids, but like, no, you can't, he's just dead. He's
Do you
dead.
know,
He's been obliterated.
I was worried they were going to do that. However, you know, next Bond film, he's been so burned, he gets skin grafted into Richard Madden. Look, he looks completely different because he's had all his face put back together because he was so burned.
Or maybe they just like make the Bond film in 20 years' time and just pretend, nah, you didn't see that. Like the old Flash Gordon serials where you would see him land in the lava of the volcano, but the previous week he had a jetpack out of nowhere and flew out the window.
Yeah.
I spoke to a mate about this who grew up watching them, and he was saying, you need to remember, people didn't record them. They had no way of remembering what happened the previous week, so you just took it like, did he hit the lava? Maybe he didn't. Maybe I just imagined that.
Because it was shown at cinemas. It was like an additional feature and like a Saturday morning screening. So they would show that, and they would show all these various serials. So you would go once a week, and you would obviously have the cliffhanger ending, and then you go back the next week, and you remember that? Oh, how's it going to go out? And then of course, like you say, jetpack, or you know, he manages to jump out the way or something, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, aye. I don't think
him hit the lava.
Yeah, aye. Somehow I don't think there was a trap door or anything. That Safin had, mind you, he had a trap door.
Oh,
he did.
Please, I really hope there's some deleted scene where you go back to it and see as kind of like the dust cloud comes, you just see Bond go ha 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 ha. It goes in like a hole in the ground.
Yeah, apart from the fact that they drained enough munitions onto the island to basically flatten it. Yeah, that would be a nice deleted scene if you see him going through the trapdoor and he's like, yeah, brilliant, and then everything just explodes anyway.
That whole island was a death trap. How they managed to keep a successful workforce there all the time, given that there was like, you know, the virus river, all the bombs that they obviously had on site, the evil genius, the plants that were designed to kill you. Like, how did anyone stay alive in that workforce?
But it must have been a very safe environment, because if you think about it, they were all in there and they were all, I don't know what they were doing in the water with the big rods in it. It looks as if they were like combing it. And they all were really surprised when one of the henchmen fell in and started burning up. They were going, "What? Wait a minute! There's something wrong here."
Wait a minute, we've been working next to this. What's in this water?
Yeah. So this is why we're wearing the suits.
I do like the fact. I like the idea if they make this killing Bond off a tradition for the last actor.
Yeah, I would
really like that.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
I think that'd be great if that became a new tradition. And you just kill him off at the end, because then you go into the film thinking, right, this is like such and such last Bond role. I wonder how they're going to do him in.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't believe that James Bond's a code name. I believe that James Bond is a person, it's just one of these things. Though it's like Batman, it's like Doctor Who. You just accept when someone else takes over the role, because you can't possibly have one person playing it forever, because it becomes ridiculous. You know, even to the extent where Daniel Craig wasn't doing his scary knees up running so much in this film because he's in his 50s now. Like, it's just not possible. So yeah, I'm okay with him sort of killing people off or whatever. You know, I would still go and see a Bond movie.
Also, speaking of Daniel Craig and off the Bond chat, briefly, do you know how much he's getting paid for the Knives Out sequels?
I saw that, yeah. It's 100 million or something like that, isn't it?
100 million for both of them.
He does a southern accent very, very well.
Netflix.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're making loads. I mean, if you think about Lockdown and Squid Games, all that stuff that's come out recently, they are raking it in.
But see, if you Google this, so it's Google Netflix business model is very, very complicated and interesting when it comes to their debt levels and manageable debt, their profit margins and stuff. It's crazy.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me it was like an Arbonne or something, like an MLM or something like that. I was going to say, like, it's you get your friends to buy 5 Netflixes and then they get their friends to buy. Like, I thought you were going to say it was something like that.
Pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you might go to your ma. Do you want to use my Netflix account? You try to start putting their Herbalife on the sides. Oh,
dear. Well, thank you so much all for listening to our Bond special, a little deviation from our usual format. We just wanted to chat about how much we loved No Time to Die. As John said, it's still like 30 showings a day in your local multiplex, so there's still plenty of time to catch it. In the meantime, you can find us on all of our social channels at Moviescramble, and if you want to drop us an email, you can email us at podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. But until next time, if you've got any ideas or topics you want to share with us, obviously just drop us a line and then we will see you soon.
See ya.
The Movie Scramble podcast will return.